The Abandoned Hotel Room. Chapter 1. A stormy night, David Parker had been driving for hours when the storm rolled in. Heavy rain pounded against his windshield, making it nearly impossible to see the road ahead. His GPS flickered, losing signal in the remote countryside. He was miles away from any major town, and exhaustion was creeping into his bones. That's when he saw it, a dimly lit hotel sign flickering through the downpour. Ridgeway Inn, it read in faded letters. It looked old, but it was open, and right now, that was all that mattered. David pulled into the empty parking lot, grabbing his bag before rushing inside. The front desk was unattended, but a small bell sat on the counter. He rang it once, and after a long pause, an old man emerged from a back room. His wrinkled face was unreadable, and his cloudy eyes seemed to scan David a little too long before speaking. "Need a room?" the man asked in a hoarse voice. "Yeah, just for the night," David said, shivering. The old man nodded, reaching under the desk to retrieve a tarnished key. "Room 306, third floor, elevators out, so you'll have to take the stairs." David took the key, noticing the man's hands trembled slightly as he handed it over. There was something unsettling about his demeanor, but David was too tired to care. He just wanted a warm bed. As he turned to leave, the old man spoke again, his voice lower this time. "Don't go near room 308. David frowned. "Why?" The old man's gaze darkened. "Just don't." David hesitated, but then gave a short nod and headed toward the stairs. Chapter 2. The Forbidden Room. The hotel was eerily silent as David climbed the creaky staircase. The dim lights flickered above him, casting long, unsettling shadows. When he reached the third floor, a strange feeling washed over him. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew, and the old carpet was damp beneath his shoes. His room, 306, was a few doors down. He passed room 308 on the way, glancing at its door. It looked no different from the others, but something about it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Shrugging off the unease, he entered his room. It was small but clean, with a simple bed, a wooden dresser, and a single lamp that flickered slightly. Tossing his bag onto the bed, he exhaled deeply. The storm outside raged on, wind howling through the old building. He was about to undress when a noise made him freeze. A soft, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the hallway. David turned toward the door, listening intently. The tapping continued, deliberate, slow, like someone knocking with just their fingertips. It was coming from room 308. A chill crawled up his spine. The old man's warning echoed in his mind. "Don't go near room 308. He shook his head. Maybe it was just an old pipe rattling or the wind pushing against a loose shutter. He climbed into bed, pulling the covers over himself. But the tapping continued, then it stopped. David let out a breath of relief until he heard something worse, the doorknob of room 308 turning. Chapter 3. The Whispering Voice. David sat up in bed, heart pounding. The creaky old door of room 308 groaned open, and for a few seconds there was only silence. Then footsteps. Soft, dragging footsteps. Someone, or something, was stepping into the hallway. David barely breathed, listening intently. The footsteps grew closer, stopping right outside his door. He clenched his fists, his body rigid with fear. Then a whisper. It was faint at first, like the wind slipping through a crack, but then it became clearer, an eerie, rasping voice, murmuring words he couldn't understand. He grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight, aiming it toward the gap beneath the door. His breath caught in his throat. A shadow. Long, thin, unmoving. Something was standing right outside his room. David's mind raced. He wanted to scream, to call the front desk, but fear held him frozen. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the whispering stopped. The shadow shifted, then slid away, retreating back into room 308. The door creaked shut. David sat in the dark for what felt like hours, listening, waiting. But the hallway remained silent. Finally, exhaustion won over fear, and he fell into a restless sleep. Chapter 4. The Photograph. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, making the events of the night before seem like a bad dream. David quickly packed his things, eager to leave. On his way out, he passed room 308 again. This time the door was slightly ajar. A sense of dread filled his chest, but his curiosity got the better of him. He pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. The room was empty, no furniture, no carpet. Just 4 bare walls covered in deep, dark scratches. And in the center of the room, a single yellowed photograph. David stepped inside, his heart hammering. He picked up the photograph, dust falling from its edges. It showed a man, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes. But it wasn't just any man. It was David. His breath caught in his throat. The photo looked decades old, yet it was unmistakably him. A sharp sound broke the silence, a whisper, "Leave." David spun around. The room was empty, but the door to room 308 slammed shut behind him. Chapter 5. The escape panic surged through him. He yanked at the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering returned, rising in volume, overlapping voices hissing incomprehensible words. The room grew colder, the air thick and suffocating. Then the whispers turned into screams. A force shoved David forward, sending him crashing into the door. He scrambled to his feet and pounded on the wood. "Let me out," he shouted. The whispers stopped. The door unlocked. David didn't hesitate. He bolted out of the room, down the hallway, and practically leaped down the stairs. The old man at the front desk barely looked up as David slammed the key onto the counter. "I'm leaving," David gasped. "Now." The old man simply nodded. "You saw it, didn't you?" David didn't answer. He just rushed out, threw his bag into the car, and sped off without looking back. Epilogue: The unfinished story. A week later, David couldn't shake the nightmare. The photograph haunted him. The whispers echoed in his mind. Curious and terrified, he searched online for any information about Ridgeway Inn. He found an old news article from 1954. Local man found dead in Ridgeway Inn, room 308. Authorities report his body was covered in deep scratches. Witnesses claimed the room had been empty for years. And beneath the article was a grainy black and white photograph of the victim. David's stomach twisted into knots. It was the same photograph he had found in room 308, and the man in the picture was still him.